They didn't even look up when I stepped through the front doors of the house I once called home. The air inside still smelled faintly of polish and old pine, like time had stopped just long enough for it to gather dust on memories I no longer owned. My boots clicked against the marble tiles louder than I wanted, like I was intruding, which, judging by the way Vivian sat at the center of the long oak table, I probably was. She lounged there like a queen, all wrapped in black silk and fake grief. Her hair was pulled tight in that severe bun she always wore when she wanted to appear composed. But it was her eyes that gave her away sharp, triumphant. She didn't even wait for me to sit down. "He loved me," she said loud enough for the whole room to hear. Not the child of his first mistake. Next to her, Dylan let out a dry chuckle, arms folded behind his head, like he was on vacation. "She's not even in the paperwork," he added, flashing that same arrogant smirk he'd worn since we were kids. The room echoed with polite laughter. Polished, subtle, but cruel. I paused, still wearing my coat. Fingers clutched around my purse like it was armor. I scanned the faces around the table, distant cousins, old business partners, people I barely remembered. No one met my eyes. No one nodded. No one asked how I'd been. It was like I'd walked into a play where the script had already been written and I didn't have a line. I took the only empty seat at the very end of the table, the seat no one wanted. It used to be his seat. My father's. Now it felt cold. I kept my head down as I unbuttoned my coat, pretending not to hear the hushed whispers 2 seats down. Vivian's laughter fluttered around the room like perfume, sweet, thick, suffocating. Dylan tapped his fingers on the table like he was counting down to his inheritance. Then the room quieted. The door creaked open and Mr. Redford entered. He looked older than I remembered, thinner. His gray suit hung a little loose, and his steps were slower than they used to be, but he still carried himself like the room would wait for him. In one hand, he held a dark leather briefcase. It clicked sharply when he set it on the table, like the starting shot of a race no one wanted to lose. "Thank you all for coming," he said, voice calm and measured. "As you know, we are here to read the last will and testament of Harold Carter." No one spoke. Not even Vivian. Not even me. The name hung in the air like smoke. My father, the man who raised me. The man who stopped returning my calls years ago. The man who let another woman erase me piece by piece, photo by photo. Mr. Redford opened the briefcase with a slow, deliberate motion. Inside were neatly stacked folders, papers, envelopes. I saw Vivian lean forward ever so slightly, lips curled like she already knew what they said. Dylan shifted in his seat, hands folded, eyes smug. They were ready to collect what they thought was theirs. And I was just waiting for it to be over. Mr. Redford reached into the briefcase and paused, his fingers grazing something near the bottom. His brow furrowed ever so slightly, a flicker quick but unmistakable. Then he pulled out a thick cream-colored envelope sealed with a deep red wax stamp, the kind that looked like it belonged in a courtroom, not a family dining room. Vivian leaned forward. "What's that?" she asked, the edge in her voice, wrapped in forced politeness. Redford glanced at her, then back at the envelope. "This," he said, holding it between both hands, "is an amended version of the original will filed and executed 3 weeks prior to Mr. Carter's passing." The room shifted. It was like someone had opened a window and let in a chill. Chairs creaked. Someone coughed into their sleeve. I felt my pulse spike without warning. Vivian's lips parted in a frozen smile that didn't reach her eyes. That's not possible. Harold was barely lucid at the end. He wouldn't have. He did, Redford said flatly. The document was signed in my presence, and that of 2 other witnesses. Your husband was of sound mind at the time, and insisted on making the changes immediately. Dylan sat up straighter now. The smirk had vanished. Changes, he repeated like the word itself was a threat. What kind of changes? Redford ignored the question. Instead, he reached for a silver letter opener and sliced the envelope with care. The sound of tearing paper felt louder than it should have, like it cut through more than wax and glue. You'll understand shortly, he said, unfolding the new documents. But I must note for the record, that this amendment completely replaces any previous distribution terms in the original will. Vivian laughed. It was sharp and brittle like glass hitting tile. This is absurd. I managed his medication. I knew every moment of his final weeks. There's no way he had the clarity he did. Redford repeated, his voice steel now, and he was deliberate. Very deliberate. He began to sort the papers into piles. My eyes locked on the trembling in Vivian's hand as she reached for her water glass but didn't drink. Dylan's leg bounced beneath the table, the picture of a man no longer in control. And me, I stayed still, because something had shifted in the room, and for the first time in years, I wasn't the one being erased. Mr. Redford adjusted his glasses, scanning the page in front of him, then looked up slowly right at me. "Elena," he said, voice steady, "could you come here for a moment, Tots?" My stomach dropped. Everyone turned. Even the chandelier above seemed to pause in the stillness. My legs felt suddenly disconnected from the rest of me as I stood and walked the length of the table, each step echoing louder than it should have. I could feel Vivian's glare trailing me, burning like a brand between my shoulder blades. When I reached him, Redford held out a small card, aged laminated, bent at one corner. I recognized it instantly. "My father's old ID," I said quietly. "He stopped using the signature after he remarried." He nodded. "That's what I thought." Then he turned the top page of the amended will toward me. At the bottom, in uneven ink, was a name I hadn't seen in years. Harold T. Carter, not H. Carter, not HTC, not the stylized signature Vivian had insisted on after she came into our lives. This was the name from birthday cards with crooked hearts drawn beside it, from my school permission slips, from the man who once held my hand as we crossed streets. It was sloppy, too large, the T barely legible, but it was him, the father who existed before she rewrote everything. My throat tightened. Redford's voice lowered just for me. "He signed it with the name he used when your mother was still alive." I swallowed hard, then nodded and returned to my seat. The wood under me felt warmer now, solid. Vivian was whispering something to Dylan, but he was no longer listening. He stared at the page with disbelief, as if the signature itself had betrayed him. "This is meaningless," Vivian snapped, rising to her feet. "That name proves nothing. He hadn't used it in decades." "Exactly," Redford replied smoothly, "which is why its sudden reappearance is significant." I didn't say a word, but something shifted inside me then, not relief, not joy, just weight. Like the ground under my feet had steadied just a little, like maybe I wasn't the forgotten one after all. Mr. Redford cleared his throat. "I'll now begin the reading of the amended will of Harold T. Carter." A pen clicked somewhere at the table, paper rustled, but the silence was tight-coiled like a string pulled too far. "To my wife Vivian Carter," he read, "I leave the sum of $10,000 in my sincere hope that she will find the peace she was always searching for." A gasp broke the stillness. Vivian blinked rapidly. Her mouth parted in disbelief. "10,000, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Dylan turned toward her, eyebrows lifting. "That's gotta be a typo," he muttered, but even he didn't sound convinced. Redford continued unshaken. "To my stepson, Dylan Carter, I leave my golf clubs and a framed photograph of our first fishing trip. I regret we never truly connected." Dylan made a sound, half cough, half laugh. "Are you kidding me?" He pushed back from the table, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is a joke, right? He wouldn't. This is ridiculous." Vivian's eyes were wide now, pupils darting like she was searching for someone to blame. Her hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. Redford didn't flinch. "And to my daughter," he said, looking straight at me, "Elena Carter, I leave the remainder of my estate. This includes the family home, all financial accounts, savings, investments, retirement funds, and personal correspondence." The room went silent. My breath caught somewhere between my ribs. I didn't move, couldn't. Vivian shot to her feet, her chair toppling backward with a loud bang. "This is fraud," she shouted. "He was manipulated, tricked. He would never do this." Redford folded his hands calmly. "He did. And it is legal." Dylan stood abruptly, fists clenched. She was out of his life. She doesn't deserve a cent. His voice cracked. Then without another word, he stormed out of the room, slamming the heavy front door behind him. Vivian stayed seething. I didn't say a word. Not out of triumph, not out of shock, but because I didn't understand. I had come here expecting nothing. I'd spent years convinced he wanted nothing to do with me. So why now everything? The room emptied slowly like the tide pulling back after a storm. Cousins shuffled out with awkward glances, unsure which direction sympathy should flow. A family friend lingered by the door, then thought better of it, and left without saying goodbye. Vivian had already disappeared, her heels clicking furiously down the hall, as if she could outwalk humiliation. Only Mr. Redford and I remained. He closed the briefcase gently, fingers resting on the worn leather for a moment. Then he looked at me. There's something else, he said quietly. He walked over to the cabinet near the fireplace and pulled open a drawer. From it, he took out a small cream-colored envelope, aged but unblemished. He held it like it was something fragile, sacred. Your father asked me to give this to you, he said, offering it to me, but only after the will was read. My name was written across the front in his handwriting. Not sweetheart, not pumpkin, not any of the nicknames he used when I was little, just Elena. I didn't open it right away. I sat back down in the same chair where I'd heard my life get rewritten and slowly peeled the flap open. His voice came through the words as if he were sitting across from me. Elena, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I waited far too long to say what I should have said in person. Years ago, Vivian told me you were stealing from me. She showed me forged bank statements, emails, said you were trying to ruin me out of spite. And I believed her. I didn't even ask you. I didn't give you a chance. My hands trembled as I kept reading. I let her poison my memory of you. And I am so deeply sorry for that. A month ago, I found out the truth. My old accountant called. He saw discrepancies in my accounts, money moved, forged documents, all pointing back to someone else, not you. So I changed the will, not out of guilt, but because it was the only thing I could still make right. The last line hit harder than I expected. Truth doesn't erase pain, but it can rewrite the ending. I hope this gives you back even a piece of what I took. Love, always, Dad. I sat there long after I finished the letter, the paper soft in my hands. The weight of years pressing down and lifting all at once. It was barely 9 a.m. when the knock came sharp, impatient. Nothing like the kind you give a neighbor. I already knew it was her. I opened the door slowly, and there she stood, Vivian. Still in black, still polished, but her lipstick was smeared at the edge, and the calm, camera-ready grief from yesterday had vanished. Her eyes were wildfire now. You knew she hissed, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. You walked into that room already knowing what he'd done. I closed the door behind her and leaned against it. No, I said, I didn't. But now I do. She laughed, a sound without humor, just teeth. You really think one pathetic apology letter and a twisted signature gives you the right to everything? I didn't ask for any of it, Vivian, I said, voice steady. He gave it. And he made sure it would hold. She moved closer, perfume thick in the air, her presence like a storm pressing against glass. You always played the victim, she spat. That's why your mother left. That's why Harold chose me. You were weak. Always waiting for someone to save you. The words hit hard, but I didn't flinch. I looked her in the eye. No, I said. I left because you turned that house into a war zone. Because I was tired of begging for scraps from a father you poisoned against me. She froze. For the first time, something flickered, doubt maybe. Fear, you think this is over, she whispered. You think I won't fight this? You can try, I said quietly. But I've already handed copies of the will, the letter, and my father's journal to Mr. Redford. Everything is documented. If you take this to court, the truth will follow you there. She stared at me, lips parted but silent. And that's when I saw it. This wasn't anger. It was fear, not of me, of the truth. She turned for the door. You'll regret this, she said coldly. I already regret a lot, I replied. But not this. She slammed the door behind her, and for the first time in years, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was mine. The house looked exactly the same. White shutters, the same rusted lantern by the porch. The creak in the third step that used to drive my mother crazy. But it felt different now, like the ghost had shifted. I let myself in with the key Mr. Redford had handed me. The air inside was still almost staged. Too clean, too still, no warmth, no life, just the echo of someone else's story. I wandered room to room, unsure what I was looking for. Then I reached the study, my father's study. His desk still sat beneath the antique lamp he'd always loved brass, with a green glass shade and a pull chain that clinked when you turned it off. And there, half hidden beneath a legal pad and a coaster, was a leather-bound notebook. No name, no lock. Just worn edges and my father's handwriting etched across every page. I sat in his old chair and began to read. Saw Elena's photo in the paper. She looked grown, strong. I wonder if she ever got my letter from 2014. Vivian says she wants nothing to do with me. Hard to believe. Maybe she's right. Maybe I ruined it beyond repair. Page after page bled with guilt. Missed birthdays, letters unsent, words he never said aloud. Then I turned to a page marked only with a date. August 3rd, talked to Jeanette again. She said the lab confirmed it. The timeline, it doesn't lie. I was wrong about everything, about who Dylan really is. I blinked. Lab, timeline. My fingers trembled as I flipped forward. August 7th. I didn't want to believe it, but Jeanette wouldn't lie. I kept the paternity results sealed in the filing cabinet. I stood up, adrenaline burning behind my ribs. The filing cabinet, bottom drawer. I remembered it always stuck. It took 2 hard pulls, but it gave way. Inside was a thin manila envelope. No markings except one word, confidential. I opened it with shaking hands. The first document, a DNA report. 2 samples, one labeled DC, the other HC conclusion. No biological relationship found. I sat back slowly. My father hadn't just been betrayed emotionally. He'd been lied to about his own blood. Dylan wasn't his son. Not biologically, not legally, and he hadn't known until just before the end. Beneath the report was a second envelope, smaller, sealed. For Dylan, I didn't open it, but I held it tight, because now I understood. The truth hadn't just changed the will, it had shattered the story they'd built. And for once, I wasn't the lie in the room. They were. Mr. Redford read the DNA report twice, then a third time. He didn't speak right away, just set the papers down with care and folded his hands over them like they were sacred. This changes the landscape, he said finally. I nodded. Can she still contest the will? He leaned back in his chair. She can try, but if this information is entered into the record, her entire claim collapses. The amended will was clearly based on your father's discovery. If Dylan is not his biological son and he never adopted him formally, he has no legal standing. Vivian's argument would crumble with it. I said nothing for a moment. The weight of it all pressed behind my ribs like a stone. I hadn't come for revenge. I didn't want to destroy anyone. I just wanted the noise to stop. The lies, the erasure, the rewriting of a life I still carried the scars from. I don't want this to go public, I said softly, not unless she forces my hand. Redford nodded. I assumed as much. We'll register it as sealed evidence admissible only if she files a legal challenge. It won't be touched unless we have to respond. Thank you, I whispered. He reached for the folder, slipping the documents back inside. For what it's worth, he said gently. Your father didn't include the test in his legal documents, just his journal. Perhaps he hoped it wouldn't need to come to this. Maybe, I said. But Vivian doesn't know when to stop. His eyes held mine. Then let's make sure this time she does. I left his office feeling something I hadn't in a long time. Prepared, not to fight, but to stand my ground. The court date never came. 2 weeks after I gave Mr. Redford the DNA report, and my father's sealed letter for Dylan Vivian's lawyer requested a private meeting. Redford told me later the man had reviewed the documents, the signatures, and the matching journal entries, and advised her to let it go. She didn't. Instead, I received a letter on thick cream stationery, her handwriting elegant and furious. You stole everything, but don't think for a second you earned it. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the lies, just venom dressed in ink. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. Some things don't deserve answers. Instead, I turned back to the house. The air still smelled faintly of cedar and paper. I walked from room to room with a quiet resolve, taking down pictures of Vivian and Dylan, from the mantel packing away monogrammed towels, trophies that weren't mine, and all the curated reminders of a life I had been pushed out of. In their place, I hung a photo of Mom and me at the lake, arms sunburned, faces grinning. I shelved my own books dog-eared and underlined. I found the old record player my dad used to love and let it play through the silence. I didn't feel triumphant, but I felt present. And for the first time in years, the house felt less like theirs, and a little more like mine. It was raining when I visited his grave. Not a storm, just the kind of steady rain that seeps into your coat but doesn't send you running. The cemetery was quiet. I found his headstone beneath a row of swaying pines, the lettering sharp and fresh. Harold T. Carter, beloved husband, devoted father. I used to think that second line was a lie. Now I think it was just unfinished. I knelt down and pulled a folded note from my coat pocket. It wasn't long, just a few words I'd written the night before. You were wrong, but you tried to make it right. That matters. We can't rewrite the past, but I'm learning to live with the truth. Thank you for seeing me. I tucked it under a smooth stone at the base of the marker and let the rain blur whatever was left on my cheeks. 3 days later, another letter arrived. Not from Vivian, it was from Dylan. I didn't know it began. I believed her. Everything she told me about you, I thought it was true. Maybe that makes me weak, maybe worse, but I'm sorry. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. I read it once, then again, then folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer with my father's journal and the sealed envelope meant for Dylan. I didn't respond, not yet. Some truths take time to hold, and some silence is healing.